English if you're just joining us on Zoom, or you are on the YouTube broadcast in English or in Spanish or in French. On the Zoom transmission, you need to choose English as your language for interpretation, since we have speakers from different parts of the world. Go to the bottom of your screen where you will see a little globe which says interpretation. If you don't see it, click on the three dots that say more, and then you will be able to see interpretation, and then please choose English. So I think we are now ready to roll. Dave, you want to indicate when you are ready for the actual transmission to begin?
So we want to welcome everyone to today's International Emergency Forum. It's worse than you think. The attack on Venezuela and how to bring the world back from the brink. Today's forum is sponsored by the Executive Intelligence Review, and as we have said, our meeting is an international meeting. We are transmitting this meeting in Spanish, French, and German. The international community needs to hear voices of sanity and clarity, and Executive Intelligence Review has therefore assembled today's panel of distinguished individuals from throughout the world. We would ask that those persons, respecting the fact that there are people on from time zones, even including 11 and 12 hours away, to please take that into consideration as you're giving your remarks. Please be as brief as possible and to the point. And we'd just like everyone to know from around the world, we deeply respect the fact that we are here today to deliberate in a way that has, shall we say, been made unavailable in general to the international community. We want to begin today with Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. She's also the executive editor of Executive Intelligence Review. So, Helga, welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends of the Schiller Institute, I welcome you. We have assembled here today not to lament the unprecedented situation of what only can be described as a threat to the existence of the entire human civilization, but to discuss, analyze, and catapult an international response to restore international law. In an interview with the New York Times on January 7th, President Trump answered the question if there was anything which would limit the carrying out of his global power by saying, yeah, there is one thing, my own morality, my own mind. It's the only thing which can stop me. I don't need international law. And indeed, that seems to be true. International law has been officially terminated and has been replaced by the might makes right principle. In the first 10 days of 2026, the United States has unilaterally attacked Venezuela, Syria, Somalia, Nigeria, and threatened to attack Cuba, Colombia, Iran, and Greenland. To all of that, the response by NATO, of which obviously the United States is the leading part, has pretty much been non-existent, or called, quote, too complex to comment. At the same time, basic constitutional rights are being eliminated. The First Amendment in the United States, the freedom of opinion, speech, and press in the European Union, as the case of Jacques Beau and 50 other 8 individuals sanctioned by the EU demonstrates. Laws are being made for total surveillance of innocent citizens under all kinds of pretexts. President Trump announced that he wants to increase the US military budget from $900 billion in 2026 to $1.5 trillion in 2027, which is a 2/3 increase. There is a military buildup in Europe not seen since approximately 90 years ago, under the pretext that Russia would prepare an attack on another NATO country for which there is no proof but lots of counter-arguments. These unprecedented military buildups can only have one explanation, namely that they are a preparation for a coming world war. There are already automated killings based on algorithms and AI software. This is taking place without any public discussion, and naturally a genocide officially registered by the highest courts of this planet, but without any consequence. And of all the many abuses going on, in all likelihood, the most dangerous event gets as good as no public acknowledgement and is at best discredited as being fake news, is the attempted assassination of the president of the technologically most advanced nuclear power in the world, with the attack of 91 drones, which were repelled. It should be clear to any thinking person that if that attack would have been successful, we would not have been convening here, but civilization would probably have ended already. The answer to that attempt was an attack on the second largest gas depot of Europe in the west of Ukraine with an Oreshnik missile at the speed of Mach 10, which together with other systems knocked out what amounts to 10% of the entire European gas reserves. Neither the attempt on the residence of President Putin nor the effect of the Russian deployment of the Oreshnik missile has found much mention in the Western media at all. Today, we learn that this past Friday, the Department of Justice threatened the head of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, with criminal indictments, which he denounced as an attempt to interfere with the right of the central bank to set interest rates according to their financial considerations, which in the recent period was the refusal to accept President Trump's demand to lower the interest rates. What if the threatening blowout of the transatlantic financial system, which is sitting on a 2 quadrillion financial bubble of essentially non-payable financial debt, including a debt of 37 trillion US debt and an equally unpayable derivative package, is the main engine which causes all these desperate activities, including the effort to attempt to set up de facto a world dictatorship. So the most urgent question, can mankind act in time to avoid the looming civilizational catastrophe? Given that we are the only species gifted with creative reason known in the universe so far, can we change the course of action and create the means of self-government, which allows not only to overcome the actual strategic crisis, but to create the condition for the durable survival of humanity? We have convened this emergency seminar to formulate a plan of action for considerations of governments, to which I have contributed 10 principles and to which other speakers of this Zoom conference will be contributing their ideas. The 10 principles of a new international security and development architecture are very briefly, and I shortened it here for purposes of time. First, the partnership of perfectly sovereign nation states. Secondly, alleviate poverty in every nation on the planet. Third, prolong life expectancy by creating a modern health system in every country. Fourth, promote creativity, access to universal education for every child and adult person living. Fifth, productive credits. Implement LaRouche's 4 laws for a reorganized international financial system. 6, create a new economic order. Build the world land bridge of infrastructure, tunnels, and bridges connecting all continents. 7th, sovereign nations must eliminate geopolitics. Our aim is to approach all governments who are members of the United Nations and suggest to them that they should convene an emergency conference of the UN General Assembly or an equivalent appropriate institution with the intention to restore international law based on the UN Charter in line with the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, welcoming the discussions of contributions of individual governments, such as the 4 global initiatives introduced by China in the recent years. Such an international conference must establish the framework for a new international security and development architecture, which for it to succeed must take into account the interest of every single country on the planet. In the tradition of the conference, which created the Peace of Westphalia, the national representatives must first agree on the principles on which this architecture must be based, and only then proceed to discuss all the distinct regional, historic, ethnic, territorial, economic, financial, etc. conflicts and their solutions. The only way how it can be possible to solve the extremely complicated array of conflicts in the world today is by first establishing a completely new paradigm in international relations. This must be the agreement that we have reached a point in the universal history of mankind where we must agree to always put the interest of mankind as a whole first before we define any national or otherwise particular interest. This is to acknowledge the fact that we are for the first time in history sitting in one boat, that because of the existence of nuclear weapons, the use of which would end civilization, the existence of pandemics which can expand over the entire world in a matter of days, the existence of the internet, etc., we are interconnected as one human species and must act accordingly. The new paradigm requires a new method of thinking. We must absolutely abandon the thinking in terms of geopolitics or any other form of thinking in terms of Aristotelian contradictions, and adopt instead the method of thinking of the great thinker of the 15th century, Nicolaus of Cusa, who developed the method of the coincidentia oppositorum, the coincidence of opposites. It involves the idea that the human mind is always capable to think the level of the higher one that is of a higher order of power than the many, and in which all contradictions of the lower level are superseded. It is actually that method which informed the Peace of Westphalia Treaty to come up with the principles which ended successfully 150 years of religious warfare in Europe. This method of the coincidence of opposites corresponds to the creative power of the human mind as the most developed geological force in the universe, as Vladimir Vernadsky called it. It is the driving force of scientific discovery of quantitatively new principles of the physical universe, and thus the motor of innovation and the related increase of the relative potential population density on Earth and beyond, sometimes in the future, as well as the increase in the living standard of all people. It is therefore of the highest strategic significance that recently, in his Jubilee speech, Pope Leo XIV evoked exactly that method of the coincidence of opposite of Nicolaus of Cusa as a way to supersede contradictions, which must be held together as a method of conflict resolution for actual political problems in the world today. He contrasted Nicolaus with those of his time who were arming themselves for the Crusades because, quote, Pope Leo XIV said, he understood that contradictions exist which must be held together, and that God is a secret in which all which exists in tension finds its unity. It is obvious that in this unprecedented civilizational crisis of humanity, we must evoke the best concepts of all great thinkers of the past, such as Confucius, Plato, or Leibniz, as well as those conceptions in the present which can constitute a platform for that higher unity of mankind. Examples of this are not only the reference by Pope Leo XIV of the coincidence of opposites, but also conceptions like the Global Governance Initiative of President Xi Jinping. Let us therefore evoke the best of what humanity has produced over time and in all civilizations in ourselves and bring it to bear. We are truly tested for our ability to survive morally, and if we can realize the beautiful potential that is only characteristic of our human species. For that, we have to actualize a tender love for humanity, agape. Thank you.
Much, Helga. And if you've just joined us, we want to welcome you to today's Executive Intelligence Review Emergency Forum, whose title is It's Worse Than You Think, The Attack on Venezuela and How to Bring the World Back from the Brink. You've just heard Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder of the Schiller Institute, and she spoke to us from Germany. This is a worldwide event. It's being translated into French, Spanish, and German, and there are options for you if you speak those languages. You can take a look at the bottom of your screen. There's a world globe. You click on that. If you don't see that, there's a word more. You click on there, and it will give you an interpretation option. Now, our next speaker is the Honorable Naledi Pandor of South Africa, former Minister of International Relations and Cooperation and the chair of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, as well as chancellor of Nelson Mandela University. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Allow me to thank the Schiller Institute for inviting me to be part of this very important debate. All of us have been reflecting on the multiple crises that we are facing in this geopolitical context, and concern has been expressed about the evident slide into chaos and abuse of respect for international law and multilateralism. For many developing countries and a number of progressive organizations, the events of this past year, while horrifying, are no surprise. They confirm our experience as developing countries that most of the powerful countries of the West believe they have the power to ride roughshod over the rights of all non-European nations. Africa and other developing regions of the world have borne the brunt of colonial exploitation and underdevelopment for centuries. And the abuse the global community has silently permitted is now maturing into untrammeled abuse of global cooperation. Much of the flaws lie in the architecture of the United Nations, specifically its Security Council, and any solution we devise must address its fundamental reform and insert real enforcement power within the reformed body. World cooperation without effective protection of the vulnerable is a global weakness the global community must address. I recall a few years ago, the African Union was in the midst of a multilateral political dilemma when leaders of the then government of Kenya were faced with an ICC indictment. The leaders of the African Union felt significant offense at what they regarded as an international law practice that seemed to find it easy to accuse and sanction Africans and yet stridently justify Western leaders' abuses of the same laws and institutions. The leaders discussed a possible continental exit from the Rome Statute, but eventually held that decision in abeyance following exhaustive discussion and a desire for Africa not to be seen to disrespect international human rights law. The leaders debated the ICC warrant, how to respond to it, and whether, in the context of double standards by others, they should even be party to the statute. After several years of debating whether or not to exit, the African Union decided to remain as signatories of the statute. The reasons for this, I believe, lie in Kenya's commitment to international human rights law. The government of Kenya had adopted a modern, rights-based constitution a few years before this debate, and appropriately felt their actions and response to the ICC needed to illustrate respect for the ICC, as rejection or retreat would imply diminished commitment. The current situation we're experiencing of flagrant abuse of international law and multilateralism requires increased commitment to multilateralism and to respect and strengthening of international treaties and conventions. The world is in the most dangerous situation of abuse of global law since the adoption of the United Nations Charter in 1948, and thus we certainly face the likelihood of a third world war. Increased attention needs to be given to identifying initiatives that could secure global impetus for altering the slide into further global chaos and humanitarian disaster. While the illegal events linked to Venezuela are extremely worrying, the fallout that will result from any attack on an already abused Cuba will be catastrophic for that nation. The global community, particularly powerful member states of the UN from the West, have proven unable or disinterested in reasserting respect for law when called on to act on the current abuses. Their inadequacy suggests a need to look elsewhere, to strengthen international institutions that have shown a power to make a difference and an interest in making a difference. Formations such as the BRICS formation, the G20, particularly with its developing country membership, the recently established 30-country Hague Group, which has committed to respect international law, the African Union, and other regional bodies should be persuaded to do more to return the world to multilateral engagement. The current lackadaisical response to US administration breaches has created a gaping hole for further breaches, and urgent action is required. This might be a moment in which civil society organizations committed to human rights can play a global leadership role. Religious organizations need to be called on to unite with human rights non-governmental organizations and to assert the vital need for global cooperation, as well as to agree on practices and partnerships which will support enhanced multilateral cooperation. We should include the United Nations as a central partner in such an initiative, and it must be supported with resources if required. Using the important commitments of the now 30-member Hague Group, this coalition for multilateralism could assert the critical importance of adherence to UN-agreed treaties and conventions. It could call on all who have breached international law and all perpetrators to face charges in global courts, and also provide support for communication and popular civic education on international law and the need for ordinary members of our societies to support international law. The world must, in conclusion, unite in action to reject the notion of might is right and show this rejection in active partnership and active protest against the abuses that we are seeing today. And we should also simultaneously act together to restore the legitimacy of multilateral cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Pandor. And if you've just joined us, we welcome you to today's Executive Intelligence Review International Emergency Forum titled It's Worse Than You Think, The Attack on Venezuela and How to Bring the World Back from the Brink. We have just heard the Honorable Naledi Pandor of South Africa, former Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Chair of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, and Chancellor of Nelson Mandela University. Our next speaker we are privileged to have speak is Professor Zhang Weiwei of China, Professor of International Relations at Fudan University, Shanghai. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Hello. Can you hear me? It's okay? Good.
Yes,
okay.
you're very clear.
Okay, good. And today we attend this emergency roundtable dialogue to condemn in the strongest possible terms the outrageous act perpetrated by the Trump administration against Venezuela, the arbitrary arrest of President Maduro. This brazen act constitutes a flagrant violation of international law, a gross infringement upon Venezuela's national sovereignty and territorial integrity, and a dangerous precedent that erodes the very foundation of the UN Charter-based post-war international order. The United States has a long and shameful record of unilateral military interventions, from Iraq to Libya to Panama. The list stretches on. Has brought nothing but chaos, human suffering, and protracted instability to the countries and peoples of these countries. This latest provocation has sparked worldwide condemnation. China has denounced US action, which constitutes a serious breach of international law and a blatant encroachment upon Venezuela's inherent rights, including its unshakable sovereignty over all its natural resources, economic activities. China firmly supports the government and the people of Venezuela in safeguarding their sovereignty, security, and legitimate rights and interests, and supports the regional countries in upholding the status of Latin America and Caribbean as a zone of peace. It's also necessary to place the US action within the broader geopolitical landscape, as it reflects the recently revised US security strategy, breaking away from the costly pursuit of global hegemony. The Trump administration now embraces what became known as the down-road doctrine, seeking to expand US sway over the Western Hemisphere as arbitrarily defined by Donald Trump, spanning from Venezuela to Panama to Greenland and beyond. Yet, in my view, this act is also extremely short-sighted and will be self-defeating. It has already inflicted heavy damage to US soft power, to its alliance system, and the very foundation of the so-called rules-based international order. It also serves as a sobering wake-up call for America's allies. For years, they joined the United States in pursuing a so-called value-based foreign policy, using humanitarian intervention as fig leaf to orchestrate color revolutions in many sovereign states and caused untold sufferings to many peoples in the world in flagrant violation of the UN Charter. We roundly condemn both the Trump administration's brazen flouting of the UN Charter and the long-standing Western practice of waging wars against other countries under various high-sounding excuses and pretexts. The international legal system anchored in the UN Charter stands as a historic milestone in safeguarding global peace and development, forged from the bitter lessons of the two world wars that claimed the lives of tens of millions. It's incumbent upon all nations to strive collectively to uphold the post-war international order underpinned by the UN Charter, and resolutely reject any attempt to erode its foundational bedrock, be it the Trump-style brazen actions or the so-called Western liberal model of military interventions under various excuses, or the dangerous resurgence of Japanese militarism, a force that inflicted untold havoc on China and many other Asian countries. On January 6th, the Chinese government announced a comprehensive ban on the export of all dual-use items to Japan, a key US ally in Asia. This encompasses all goods, techniques, technologies, and services that could be diverted to military purposes. And China will never tolerate the revival of Japanese militarism, no matter what excuses are used or whatever external support is secured. Our stance is rooted in the unwavering commitment to defend the UN Charter and the Charter-based post-war international order. This sweeping ban may also be a warning to the United States. Any moves that harm China's legitimate interests, whether in Venezuela or other parts of the world, will elicit forceful response from China. Let all peace-loving countries across the globe unite as one in our common endeavor and struggle against any and all acts that trample upon the post-war international order anchored on the UN Charter. Let us take all possible means to curb any such acts and defend the fundamental principles of justice and equity that underpin our shared global governance framework. With this, I thank you all for your patience, for your attention. Thank you all.
And we thank you for your presentation, sir. We have just heard Professor Zhang Weiwei of China, Professor of International Relations at Fudan University, and he has just spoken to today's Emergency International Forum titled It's Worse Than You Think, The Attack on Venezuela and How to Bring the World Back from the Brink, sponsored by Executive Intelligence Review. Our next speaker is Ambassador Chaz Freeman of the United States, former ambassador to Saudi Arabia, former Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs, and China scholar. Welcome.
Thank you, Dennis, and thank you very much, Helga, Zepp-LaRouche, for convening this very timely conference. We're here not to engage in polemics, but to avert a tragedy, the apparently inexorable unfolding of foreseeably terrible events. As German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier has just warned us, we are in the midst of what he called a breakdown of values that is turning the world, quote, into a den of robbers, where the most unscrupulous take whatever they want, unquote, and where entire regions or countries are treated as the property of a few great powers. My country, the United States of America, is the most powerful in the world. It has now followed its Israeli protectorate into protracted war on the truth, repudiation of the rule of law, and shameless bullying and violations of the sovereignty of all who oppose it. The already wealthy once again feel free to rob the poor with impunity. We are back to the law of the jungle and aggressive imperialism. Ever more countries emulate the mafia's protection racket practices and intimidation techniques. If this is not stopped, we are headed for a second dark age. The purpose of international law has always been to ensure that the strong could no longer victimize the weak. Insistence on this principle, even if imperfectly respected, is what has separated civilization from barbarism. If the law is no protection, nations will be forced to rearm against potential attack by others. If they face the threat of nuclear, chemical, or biological attack, they will build their own weapons of mass destruction to deter this. If alliances are no longer reliable, nations will hedge or simply abandon them to combat or cut their own deals with adversaries. This is not speculation. It is the visible trend of our times. As we've seen in the case of the Gaza genocide, words alone cannot halt atrocities, nor can unenforced decisions of the United Nations or international courts. Intensifying citizen protests have failed to wean allegedly democratic governments from tolerance, complicity, or actual support for increasingly blatant crimes against humanity and brutal efforts to subjugate or curtail the freedom of independent nations and peoples. The collective West continues to profess that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But this now has no credibility. We support Israel's ongoing genocide and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, its efforts to dismember Syria, its depredations in Lebanon, and its preparations for renewed aggression against Iran and Yemen. To defend this hypocrisy, our democracies now emulate authoritarian regimes by suppressing freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and academic freedom. We have abandoned due process to punish anyone who effectively refutes the official narrative. Evidently, we believe it's necessary to betray Western values to save them. This is a disastrous misjudgment. In the New World disorder, neither the norms of international law nor public opinion constrain the behavior of great powers. They have learned how to manipulate their citizens' perceptions of reality to assure public support and achieve impunity for their amoral abuses of power. Mass media faithfully echo official propaganda. Journalists self-interestedly amplify it, while corporate media platforms treat anything that challenges it as seditious and ban it. Western media refuse to consider or report the strategic anxieties that prompted Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. They portrayed the US effort to exploit Ukraine's distress to requisition its rare earths as compassion, not greed. Unconcealed vanity and hubris have now brought about US naval acts of piracy against Venezuela and murders of its citizens on its near seas, the decapitation of its government, the theft of its natural resources, and the proposed reduction to an economic colony of the United States. So much for the respect for national sovereignty that is the foundation of the United Nations Charter and international law. The United States now unabashedly presents itself as an untrustworthy expansionist power that substitutes unilateral diktats, intimidation, and the use of force for diplomacy. This gangster logic is contemptuous of the interests and honor of other countries. It now menaces Greenland, a self-governing part of Denmark, a member of NATO, and a loyal ally of the United States. The transformation of the United States from protector to predator threatens not just to splinter the core of Western civilization, but to unravel the transatlantic alliance. Washington seems to have decided to abandon Europe to its fate in order to impose a tyrannical monopoly on the political economy of the Western Hemisphere. It aims to expel the influence of competing great powers and keep them, especially China, at bay, without regard to the interests of those the United States proposes to dominate. This brutal reinvention of the Monroe Doctrine seems less likely to bring the nations of South America to heel than to encourage them to seek Chinese and other foreign protection against North American control. The kickoff was military aggression against Venezuela, but Washington has made it clear that this was merely an opening move with much more belligerence to come. Meanwhile, Israel continues to defy international law and norms of human decency with impunity. It seeks to annihilate those Palestinians it cannot subject to apartheid. It treats the scheduling of negotiating sessions with its opponents as opportunities to murder them, not to make peace. It signs ceasefires only to violate them. Its armed forces and security services routinely invade the sovereignty of its neighbors. It has no plan for peaceful coexistence with these neighbors. It aims instead to consolidate a US-backed Israeli sphere of influence in West Asia, within which it can continue to expand at will. This is a formula for the ongoing destabilization of the region in endless escalating warfare and resistance to maltreatment through terrorism. It promises even greater insecurity, not just for Israelis, but for their Western backers. The world cannot permit a continued descent into a moral and legal abyss. If governments do not counter lawless behavior with concrete actions, the precedents now being set in Europe, West Asia, and South America will be replicated elsewhere. And life everywhere will be increasingly nasty, brutish, and short. Rhetorical resistance to lawlessness is not enough. We have come to a tipping point. If we cannot now persuade our governments to take effective action to punish and deter further crimes against the Westphalian order of sovereign states, it and the rules-regulated international order it birthed will surely perish from the earth. We must now acknowledge the reality that the structures we created to promote peace and progress after World War II have finally failed. Their failure is mirrored not only in the absence of effective statecraft to resolve conflicts, but in domestic constitutional crises and the erosion of democratic freedoms everywhere. It is past time for a fundamental reappraisal of institutions and policies that have manifestly failed by the governments responsible for their failure. In this regard, Italy's Giorgia Meloni is entirely right to make the common sense argument that peace in Europe demands that Europeans talk to Russia, not just among themselves and to Ukraine. Like it or not, Russia is part of Europe. Without dialogue with Russia about the warfare that threatens Europe and is consuming Ukraine, Europeans cannot resolve the conflict or protect their own long-term security interests. The United States is no longer able or willing to do this for them. It's surely anomalous that Europeans should entrust the crafting of a peace that is central to their subcontinent's stability to amateur envoys of an American president who says he regards them as competitors and who seems to have little interest in them except as wealthy purchasers of American weaponry. Recent US efforts to subjugate Venezuela underscore the dangerous unrealism of the argument that, quote, every country, including Ukraine, of course, has the right to choose its international alliances, unquote, without regard to the impact of their alignment on others. Unscrupulous predators now take what they can. Their prey yield what they must. Might may not make right, but it is foolish to ignore it. Whatever Mexico may think about past US aggression, it is careful not to align itself against the United States. Vietnam prudently avoids military alliances aimed at China, as Bangladesh does against India. There is no future for a less circumspect approach by Ukraine to its mightier Russian neighbor. Russian statecraft is dominated by memories of foreign invasion from both the East and West. Moscow's security anxieties are not irrational. Both Germany have invaded Russia. Any peace in Europe must address both Russian anxieties about another Western attack on it, especially as Germany rearms, and Western concerns about Russia. Europeans need to take charge of defining their own destiny. They, non-Russian and Russian alike, are the parties directly at interest in composing a mutually reassuring security architecture for their subcontinent. Prime Minister Meloni deserves the support of other European leaders in a joint effort to engage Russia in dialogue about how peace in Ukraine might help bring forth such an architecture. Peace in Ukraine would benefit the entire world, but it alone would not cure the manifest infirmities of our legacy global institutions. If the United Nations Security Council cannot regulate world peace and development or enforce the decisions of the International Court of Justice, we must explore workarounds and alternatives to it. There is nothing to prevent countries from gathering in ad hoc conferences to agree on the application of collective rules and actions that address their common concerns. There is nothing to prevent members of the crippled World Trade Organization from recreating its functions at the regional level. There is no reason to allow the ideal of universality to preclude action at less than universal levels to address and resolve problems that most members of the international community regard as urgent. If the UN system, like that of the League of Nations, has failed, it is time to discuss how to repair or replace it. The breakdown in values to which German President Steinmeier referred has engendered a disastrous collapse of international law and institutions. It took a devastating disintegration of global order in 2 world wars to give birth, respectively, to the League of Nations and the United Nations. The current world disorder could well produce another global war, this one nuclear and possibly fatal to our species. Surely it is in our collective interest to forestall this by taking action to reconfigure the dying 20th century system to create something better. I sense that our governments are beginning finally to understand that in the newly anarchic circumstances, they cannot continue business as usual. We must demand that they meet the challenges of the day and no longer allow them to silence those who insist they do so. Thank you.
Ambassador Freeman, we want to deeply thank you for the clarity of your presentation. Today's International Emergency Forum is called It's Worse Than You Think, the attack on Venezuela and how to bring the world back from the brink. We have just heard Ambassador Chas Freeman of the United States, former ambassador to Saudi Arabia, former Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs, and China scholar. So far today, we have heard speakers from Germany, South Africa, China, and the United States. Our next speaker is Dmitri Trenin of Russia. He is the director and academic supervisor of the Institute of World Military Economy and Strategy at the HSE University of Moscow. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to thank you, the organizers, for inviting me to this very important discussion. I've just heard a larger part, I think, of Ambassador Freeman's presentation, and I commend him on the thoughtfulness of his remarks. I must say, however, that I take a much bleaker view of where we are and where we're moving to. I think that there's no question in my mind that the world is in crisis. That is a functional analogy of a world war. There are wars around. They do not qualify as one great world war, but functionally, we're talking about the use of force and the use of other means other than military arms to change the existing world order or to prevent that change. And I think that instability is the key feature of the current moment. And wishing otherwise is clearly commendable, but hardly realistic. The polycentric world is already a reality, but a multipolar order is not within reach. I think that nations, states, other actors will have to fight it out, will have to fight hard, and they are even today trying very hard and fighting hard in order to ensure that the new international, global, or world setup meets their requirements and protects or promotes their interests. We are taking part in an emergency meeting emergency discussion that was provoked by the action in Venezuela. But I'm asking myself, is this truly total novelty? I think that the action that Israel and the United States took about 6 months ago, slightly more than that, with regard to Iran, was a much more stunning example of what war could look like in the 21st century. What happened in Venezuela just a few days ago was a very light version of that new style of using force to reach political goals. I think that the advent of Donald Trump, although it did severely impact the international system and changed accents, priorities in America's foreign policy, is still aimed at the goals that U.S. foreign policy has been following since the Second World War. So I do not see that there's much novelty there either. Well, the liberal globalist collective West is no longer with us today, thanks to Donald Trump. It is more of a great power American drive to establish itself as the prime force in the world. It's if you like, hegemony without the responsibility that American leaders felt for the various elements of their empire since 1945. It is an important change, and I think it's more important for American allies than it is for American adversaries. But it's really a variation of the policies that we've been familiar with in the past 8 decades. Those who used to fear ideological crusades aiming at regime change in their countries or military interference in their countries have to brace for naked military interventionism that doesn't bother about pretexts for military intervention. So right is might, that's clear, and cynicism has replaced hypocrisy. To some people, this is preferable to just listening again to the lofty phrases that are providing a flimsy cover for unseemly actions. I think that again, I very much commend Charles Freeman on his thoughts and recommendations, but in my view, Trump, if we're talking about him, will not stop until someone pushes back against him. In Venezuela, it would have taken just a couple of helicopter crashes to lead to a failure of the mission. And it was seemingly an easy thing to do, but I think we all suspect that Venezuela was an inside job, and those who did that job did it incredibly well, although clearly that resulted in dozens of people being killed. But as I said, like in Iraq in 2003, this looks like a case of a covert operation that succeeded in using domestic traders to topple, or to, in this case, to surrender the head of the government to the invading force. I think the message that is being sent by Venezuela to Russia, I think China as well, be on your guard. No one is safe in this situation. And the things that certainly we in Russia thought would never happen have already happened in a number of situations during the war in Ukraine. Russia and China need to interact more to make sure that attempts against them are duly foiled. With regard to Iran, I think Iran will have to do a better job than it did in June to protect itself. Although I think any move by Iran to resume its nuclear program is likely to be countered by Israeli and American strikes, similar to those of June last year, I think a lot of people will agree that the only protection against interventionism by a major power would be nuclear weapons. That carries enormous risks to the world, but I think that is the message that has been tested, that rests on a lot of experience of the last quarter century or so. And there's another message, particularly for the Russians: do not exercise too much restraint. It may be fatal. I think this message also should ring very strongly in the ears of the Iranians. Let me stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Trenin. We've just heard Dmitri Trenin of Russia, the Director and Academic Supervisor of the Institute of World Military Economy and Strategy at HSE University of Moscow. He's just addressed our emergency forum titled, "It's Worse Than You Think: The Attack on Venezuela and How to Bring the World Back from the Brink." We will now hear His Excellency Donald Ramotar of Guyana, former President of Guyana 2011 to 2015. Welcome.
Thank you. The kidnapping of the Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro marks a giant step backwards for humanity. It is a return to gunboat diplomacy, when a colonial power landed its troops and changed governments at its will. The big difference now is that we have one colonial power. The United States, by its action, has transformed itself to a super colonial power. And it's not now only directed at the global South and the former colonies, but even developed countries in Europe is now facing colonialization. This is how the government headed by Donald Trump is making, or hopes to make, or this is his interpretation of making America great again. This is also a ring. This also has a ring of gangsterism in it. It is a mafia style of operation, reminiscent of Mario Puzo's The Godfather. Even the language in diplomacy has changed. No longer do we speak about agreements and accords, but now we talk about deals, making deals, which give an idea of some of the thinking of those who head the most powerful country in the world at this time. It is clear that this administration does not have any regard for sovereignty of states, nor of international laws. And we have seen, as has been said here before, during this last 3 years, what took place in the Middle East, and to the terribly suffering of the people of Palestine, that international institutions are being totally disregarded. And it's clear to me that there's an attempt to even destroy them. If the laws and institutions cannot be used by the powerful United States to achieve its end, then they're trying to get them discarded. The Trump regime has taken on itself the power to change governments and to take whatever it wants by force. This is now not confined to developing countries, I have said, but we've seen the demand to take over Greenland from Denmark. And that is not the end. Countries like Cuba is being threatened, and we know what that can be. The Cuban government has just denied that they have any type of conversation going on with the United Nations, apart from the regular conversation they've had about migration. Russia is being threatened as the United States military boards its tanker, flying its flag. And I think that is testing. I just heard the Russian comrade present here. I agree with him fully, because I think this is testing their resolve to counter what is going on. And it was very disappointing to me to see that the foreign minister spokesperson thanking the United States for sending back the 2 Russian nationals that is on that trip. I don't think that this now calls for good manners. The immediate target is China and the BRICS countries. The United States, by its action, is admitting that it is incapable of competing with China peacefully. It has openly resorted to using fear to push China out of Latin America and the Caribbean. And many, many governments in this region, particularly in the Caribbean, are very, very much afraid. The Jamaican Prime Minister just made a statement when he was asked to comment on what took place in Venezuela. He said he wouldn't comment because it would anger the United States, and his #1 job is to protect the people of Jamaica. And that he had said it loudly. The other Caribbean leaders have not said it that loudly, but that is the mood prevailing among a lot of Caribbean leaders. BRICS, they wanted to destroy BRICS because the failure of sanctions against Russia, which was designed to destroy Russia, has failed completely. And now those countries of BRICS are resorting more and more to free themselves from the dependence of the dollar and trading more and more in their own currencies. And this can have a devastating effect on the United States, whose debt is now more than $1 trillion, and who more than 38 trillion, or about $38 trillion, and which they're paying $1 trillion a year to service. And disregarding all of that economic situation that exists, Trump is now going to militarize the economy even more by announcing that it's going to spend $1.5 trillion on its military, which probably would be doubling the next 10 countries put together in military spending. And I think that this is one of the attempts. This is because the fear of losing their position, the United States is now resorting to more and more force to try to protect their #1 position. The brazenness of the attack on Venezuela has shocked the world, but really it should not have. The signs have been there for some time now. Most recently, it was seen in the Middle East, the genocide and the ethnic cleansing taking place on Palestinian lands was not possible without the full support of the United States. This support is all embracing. It includes economic support for Israel's collapsing economy, military as it aids in rearming the Israeli military machine over and over again, and in intelligence, apart supplying weapons and intelligence, and giving them the most sophisticated type of equipment with both intelligence and weapons, and using the poor Palestinian people as guinea pigs in developing more destructive weapons and other forms of communication. Diplomatically, it has supported them, as we know, and they even sanctioning United Nations personnel, preventing them, taking away their visas, doing the same thing with the criminal courts and all of that. The support is because the United States and Israel plans to ethnically cleanse Palestine. One of the same. They want to make money. This is greed in all its nakedness. And unfortunately, the Arab states, sadly, have been acquiescing in this diabolical plan. The actions of the United States government internationally is a reflection of what is beginning to take place inside the United States itself. For some time now, we have been seeing many unhealthy trends in the body politics of the United States. This trend began accelerating with George Bush Jr.'s presidency at the beginning of this century. We spoke over and over about the misinformation that was used to invade Iraq, to invade Libya, and to destroy those countries. Important institutions, United Nations, are constantly being undermined. Trump is accelerating it, but it started well before Trump came to government. And in the United States itself, the institutions that have been upholding democracy in that country and upholding some of the basic freedoms are beginning to appear to be impotent. Congress itself is now being deluded of a lot of its authority. Opposition to many of the actions of the United States, both at home and abroad, is being crushed. We saw during the last few years that solidarity by students with the Palestinian people have been punished by expulsion from the country, by students not being able to graduate, by attack by the military forces on it. And now we see military presence in many of the main states, many of the big cities in the United States, something that we never expected to see. But that is now becoming a norm, which end up in the killing of a poor woman, a brutal murder, I would say, because I had a chance to look at the video myself, and it's clear the shooter was in no danger of his life, as is being being said. So this situation, we have reached a stage where civilians are shot while protesting. We were warned of this possibility by President Eisenhower as far back as 1961 in his farewell address. What is clear now is that the government of the United States is in the hands of the military-industrial complex completely, and the oil companies, in alliance with the oil companies, and maybe they're also probably a good examination, but will probably show that they have interconnecting directors. Having captured the most powerful state machinery, this clique is now aiming at controlling as much of the world as possible. Latin America and the Caribbean are the easiest victim because of the proximity, geographical proximity to the United States. We are at the stage where we must work to halt this crazy plan. If we don't, then at best, we will be bequeathing to the future generations a new struggle for national liberation, which our generation had fought at great sacrifices, and many, many people died. And at worst, we can end in a global war. With science and technology at the level where we are at the moment, as we speak, it will not only be millions of people that are dying, but the possibility of life itself on our planet would die. Therefore, the unity of all peace-loving, and democratic forces in the world is indispensable to success. In the United States, we must strive to create a very clear alternative to this madness that this clique has putting up with. And that is why I commend the announcement a day or two ago of putting up of a presidential candidate. And I hope that they will write on their banners peace, disarmament, and development to save our world from a catastrophe. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much also, President Ramotar. We've just heard His Excellency Donald Ramotar of Guyana, former president of Guyana 2011 to 2015. And you are listening to the Emergency Forum, International Forum. It's worse than you think, the attack on Venezuela and how to bring the world back from the brink. This is an international forum, and I'm proud to say that we have people on from time zones, including 12 hours away. Just want to make sure, and we're working pretty well so far, and we just want all the speakers, again, to keep up to observe on the time. That's not been a problem, but we simply want to reassert it and also make it clear to everyone watching that you're watching something that is otherwise probably unavailable to you, and we're very proud of this. Our next speaker is Mr. Hans Christoph von Sponeck of Germany. He's the former United Nations Assistant Secretary General and former UN Humanitarian Coordinator for Iraq. He's also the author of a book called A Different Kind of War, the UN Sanctions Regime in Iraq. Welcome. Muted, excuse me. Please.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you. Thank you very much.
I very much apologize. Let me start by saying I've lived and studied and worked in America. What I see, read, and hear from present US leaders is not the America I've learned to appreciate. I'm grateful to Ambassador Freeman for what he has said about the current US foreign policy. I want to say that I firmly stand by the good America that still exists. We must help this good America to get on its feet and to do so with compassion and honesty, but also with fortitude and determination in rejecting the irresponsible muscle politics, the brutality, the immorality, and the dishonesty of the present US administration. The US government's military attack on Venezuela's sovereignty, this act of invasion, needs no further debate, only confirmation of its profound illegality. Diplomatic appeasement or sycophancy have no place, have absolutely no place here. What is needed are carefully considered responses from governments, civil society, and the UN to react forcefully in conveying that the world, yes, the world is bigger than one, that the world is not willing to subjugate itself any longer to unilateral decision-making, and the global peace and security for all have their unequivocal attention. What interests me now is what can we do? What can be done now? I see 4 areas of action. Action 1, the UN General Assembly in partnership with civil society should be encouraged to pass a resolution rejecting US geopolitical behavior and pointing out the global consequences for the US should it continue to violate UN Charter and other international law. The resolution should remind political leaders that impunity of the few will have to be replaced by accountability of all. Action 2, the real danger that in the aftermath of the US attack on Venezuela, civil war may break out in Venezuela should invoke international responsibility to prepare immediately a UN-supported mediation process between the government of Delcy Rodriguez, the acting president of Venezuela, and opposition groups. Action 3, I'm glad to hear what Professor Zhang has said about US government violations of all basic principles of life. After years of continuous serious violations of international law and its UN-related obligations by US governments has come to invoke Article 6 of the UN Charter. And I do not say this lightly. This article states, quote, a member of the UN which has persistently violated the principles contained in the UN Charter may be expelled from the organization. The expulsion of any nation from the UN should, in my opinion, however, be avoided. Instead, US membership in the UN should be frozen until such time that its government shows a credible willingness to abide by international law. Action 4, regrettably, it has to be recognized that our world lacks an integrated social movement. The World Social Forum is defunct. A truly worldwide civil society organization is urgently needed and, if created, could become the strongest power on earth. This should encourage governments and citizens alike to make every effort to work towards such an organization and do so in full compliance with the UN Pact for the Future adopted by the General Assembly in 2024. And doing so using proposals that already exist in Japan, in South Africa, and in Switzerland. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. von Sponeck, for your proposals. And for those of you who've just joined us, that was Mr. Hans Christoph von Sponeck, former UN Assistant Secretary General. So those proposals are particularly noteworthy to listen to, and perhaps we'll have a chance to discuss about this. Now, for our next speaker, we want to say that the speaker will be María de Los Angeles Huerta of Mexico, and she will be speaking in Spanish. So for the English speakers, you will have to go to the English channel, not in Great Britain, to hear the interpretation. You can get there by clicking onto the globe or the word more. If you don't see a globe at the bottom of your screen, bottom right, usually, and you'll see the word more, you click on, and it will give you an interpretation option, and then you can select English. All right, so again, this is, excuse me, former Congresswoman María de Los Angeles Huerta of Mexico. Welcome.
Hola, ¿qué tal?
Hello.
Muchas gracias a
Thank you
todos.
very much to all of you, and
Me siento muy honrada
I'm
de
very
poder
honored
participar en
to
este
be able to
simpático
participate
y
in
por
this very
supuesto quiero
important forum. And of
agradecer
course, first of all,
al Instituto
I
Schiller,
would
a
like to
Dmitri,
thank
a María,
EIR and the
por
Schiller
esta,
Institute and all of
por
you
esta posibilidad, por supuesto,
for
nuestro
having this
moderator.
opportunity, and of course,
Pues
our
no hay
dear
duda
Helga.
que el
There's no
2026
doubt
nos muestra
that
esta
2026 is
brutalidad
showing us
desenmascarada,
brutality
el ataque
unmasked,
a
the attack
Venezuela
on
y otras
Venezuela
acciones, pero
and other
este
actions,
de manera más
including
reciente nos muestra
that most
cómo
recently, and
hay
the threats against
amenazas
Mexico and
graves
their
de
very
depredación
serious threats of
global
global
de Donald
depredation,
Trump y
and that
sus
Donald Trump
cercanos
and
seguidores
his
están
close
en la
followers
lógica de
are involved
reaccionar de
in
manera
the
brutal, ¿no?
logic of
Es
responding in a brutal
momento, diría
fashion.
yo, de un
I
paradigma
would call
moribund,
this
de un sistema
the
financiero en
death
bancarrota
rattle of
que
a
solo
bankrupt
concibe
financial
al mundo
system
como una jungla en
that
donde
conceives of
se
the world only as
compra
a jungle,
disputa
and what is at
estratégico,
issue is
pero para quien
perhaps the
sea
entire
más fuerte
world
lo agarre.
to
Así que
see
creo
whoever
que
is the
nuestra
strongest will
tarea
take
es
control of it.
doble, una
So we have a double
ciertamente
task.
condenar
We have to
brutalmente
condemn
como
the
estos hechos
brutality
brutales más bien, ¿no? De
which
los
are
que
being committed
hemos sido
today,
testigos. Y por otro
which
lado,
we have been witnessing. And on the other hand,
pues
we also
pensar,
have
como
to
ya Helga lo
think,
ha
as
planteado,
Helga has
estos
already
12
stated it
puntos
with her
la
10
posibilidad de un
policy
nuevo
points,
paradigma
10
y de otras
principles of a new
acciones. Y mi
paradigm and other
propuesta está
actions.
basada
I
en
have a
lo que
proposal which is
Helga
based
ha
on what
planteado como estos
Helga
10
has
puntos
presented in terms of the
básicos
10
de
principles, which are basic
pensar el mundo.
issues to think about the
Primero,
entirety of the
creo que
world.
la trinchera
First,
de América
I
Latina es
believe
muy
that the
importante.
Latin
Creo
America
que
trench is very important,
consolidar un plan de
and we have to
reconstrucción y
have a
desarrollo para las
plan for
Américas
the
tiene
reconstruction
que
and
ser
development
una
for the
prioridad.
Americas
Hay
is a
algunas
priority.
ideas que se han
There are some
planteado
ideas
antes,
which have
desde hace
been
más de
posed
20
and presented going
años,
back as
como
far as 20
la idea
years,
de un
such
corredor
as the idea of as
que atraviese el
a
Golfo
corridor to
del
that
Atlántico al
would
Pacífico,
would
¿no? Y
cross from the
otras
Atlantic to
ideas
the
de
Pacific, a
desarrollo que
rail
están
corridor,
ahí
and other development
propuestas y
proposals
planteadas y
that
que creo
already
que
exist and which have
empezar
been
a
presented, and
concretar.
we have to
Pensamos
start
que
making those
primero
concrete. So
sería
first,
fundamental pensar en un
first of
fondo de
all, we have
soberanía
to have
monetaria y
a
energética
monetary and
basado en los
energy
BRICS
sovereignty
y las
fund to use
monedas
the
de los
BRICS
países
Plus
latinoamericanos,
and
las
the
monedas
national
nacionales
currencies of
para
these
ir
countries and Latin
blindando
American countries
financieramente, no solamente a
to be able
Venezuela, sino a
to
todos los
provide
países
protection and support, not just for
latinoamericanos,
Venezuela, but to
todavía
all of the countries of Latin
tenemos
America,
gobiernos populares
because
y
there are
gobiernos del
still some
pueblo
popular
para
governments who answer
detonar
to their
un
people's
sistema
needs
de
and to
pagos
start to
y
create an
una
alternative
política del
payment
dólar,
system to
¿no?
the
Que aunque
dollar.
los BRICS ya lo han planteado,
Because
ojalá
even though the
pudiéramos
BRICS have
hacerlo
posed this,
a
we
nivel
could do
continental
this on a
y sería
continental level as
seguir
well.
apretando esta
And
idea del
to
corredor
start strengthening this
bioceánico.
idea,
Ya
as I said, of a
Mandela,
bioceanic
que
rail
ya se ha
corridor, which
planteado
exists
desde
as an idea, which
principios
is Brazil and other
años, esto
countries have
no ha
proposed,
acabado
but
de
which has not
concretarse, una red
yet been put into
ferroviaria de
action.
alta
This would be a
velocidad que
high-speed
conecte
rail network
a
which
los dos
connects the
océanos y
Pacific
además
and the
acompañe de
Atlantic
una
Oceans,
red
along
eléctrica,
with a
¿no? De
continental
energía
electricity grid based on
renovable, incluso
renewable and peaceful
nuclear, pero que
nuclear
va
energy.
generando a su paso
This
pues
would generate
muchos millones de
millions
empleos,
of industrial and
industria, ¿no?
technological
Y abonando
jobs.
al desarrollo tan
And
necesario
this
que
could contribute to the development
Latinoamérica.
which Latin
Y
America so desperately
después,
needs.
pues un
Then,
punto, ¿no? De
third
seguridad
point would
colectiva
be
en donde
a
haya algún tipo de
21st century
tratado, ¿no? De
collective
defensa
security pact, a kind of
mutua
mutual
entre los
defense
países
treaty
y que
that
la unidad
activates
de los
coordinated
países para
responses to any
tener
military, economic,
mecanismos de
or
seguridad
cyber
nacional. Me
aggression.
parece
And
algo
to
fácil,
use this
pero
as
de todas maneras
deterrence,
planteamos
sounds
como
easy, but
una
nonetheless,
posibilidad. Y no correr
this doesn't sound easy,
paralelamente
but this
a
is
esta
something we have to consider.
destrucción
And to
que
deal with the kind of
propone hoy
destruction which today
gobierno
is
de Donald
seen
Trump,
coming
¿no?
from the
Esta
government of Donald
visión
Trump, this
imperial,
imperial view,
neofascista,
really a
innegable
neo-fascist
ya
view,
para
undeniable
todo el
now
planeta, es una cosa
to the
que
eyes of the
necesitamos
entire world.
pensar,
This is
porque si
something that we have to
solamente
think about,
estamos
because
en
if we're
teoría de
just
la lógica de la guerra,
looking at the
no
logic of
podremos
war,
pensar,
we will
¿no? De
not
una
be able to
manera
think in
una
a
alternativa. Por
in
eso
terms of the
pienso además que
alternatives. So
México
therefore,
puede
I
ser
think
en
that
muchos sentidos
Mexico,
un
in many
pivote,
ways, has to be a
como
kind
ustedes
of
saben, es un
workshop
socio
or
comercial de Estados
pivot,
Unidos, pero a la
pivotal state. It is
vez
a
un
major
inversor
trading
partner of the United States, and at the same time, it's the next designated victim. So, as everybody knows as well, there is already a brutal intervention into the political life of Mexico that is already going on. So such a collective security pact could have this idea of reconstructing the sovereignty of the nations of the Americas. We also think that this has to be an idea which is extended to the world as a whole, because the idea of having a multilateral fund or having some global system of interconnectedness that we are proposing for the Americas also has to be thought of in terms of the world as a whole. And this is already being proposed. We have the Belt and Road Initiative, the New Silk Road. We have the idea of the Trans-African Corridor, this idea of a bioceanic rail corridor that I've mentioned in the Americas. I don't consider this as a kind of just creating a global association of countries in favor of construction of infrastructure, but we have to generate solutions to poverty. We need sovereignty for all. There have to be solutions outside the framework of the dollar, which in some way can also weaken the power and force of the empire. I think that what has already happened in the BRICS is very important, but all of the other countries as well, countries that are allied, and those of us who have not yet joined in or allied, can start thinking about the need on the economic front, but also in terms of the union of the nations for the construction of sovereign infrastructure, as China has done in a masterful way and an impressive way. These are pathways that are an alternative to the collapse. Then we also have to have an international development security tribunal. We think that a legal political body which offers collective guarantees against interventions that sabotage sovereign development projects is necessary, which we have been discussing. Any country that attacks development infrastructure will face the unified economic sanctions and the diplomatic isolation from all members of this system which we're proposing. This would be a kind of alternative system based on the idea of infrastructure, construction, development for the less developed countries could, I think, also with China and Russia playing a leading role in this could perhaps propose, on the one hand, a challenge to the current world empire, but it would also be a kind of construction and reconstruction of sovereignty. I think, in conclusion, I believe that something which we could propose today is to issue a declaration that we would create an immediate action group, that we're not here just to talk about administering the collapse, but rather to develop new pathways, new views, and that we could perhaps issue a statement, a January 12th declaration, to establish the idea of creative sovereignty with the development of various countries as the basis for a kind of new world order, the creation also of an action group that would take immediate action, that would have 3 task forces, one on the financial side, one on the technical side, one on the diplomatic side, that can be structured somehow. This idea from the financial group of having a productive credit bank. The technical group could convene a first summit of the Global Interconnection Agency for Infrastructure, for corridors of development, and so on. And of course, a diplomatic team to present the idea of a development security tribunal initiative, perhaps to the United Nations or to regional blocs. Not sure, but these are ideas which I submit for your consideration. And this was ideas that have arisen from studying Helga's 10 principles. And I believe that jointly we can think of very concrete actions. And as I said, taking up again, as I said, the idea that the world community, that the people, and that the voices of the people with such a structures that we have, such as the internet, that we can make sure that every country, that every nation has a presence with people in their own countries, and through these networks to be able to tell the world that yes, we are the people of the world, yes, the citizens of the world, we are organized, and we can begin to construct to new paradigms and new views, new visions for a future outside and not including a third world war. That is all, friends. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your proposal. And we have just heard former Congresswoman María de los Ángeles Huerta of Mexico, who just made her presentation and proposal to today's Emergency IR Forum, It's Worse Than You Think, the attack on Venezuela, and how to bring the world back from the brink. Now, besides Mexico, Germany, South Africa, China, the United States, Russia, Guyana, even the United Nations have spoken here so far today. Our next speaker hails from India, where I believe it's sometime after 10 p.m. in the evening. And this is Mr. Namit Verma, author and security expert. Welcome.
Namaskar. Thank you, David. And thank you, Madam Helga, for inviting me to this conversation. Has been very, it's good to hear so many views from different parts of the world. And I will try not to repeat what has already been contributed to the table, but to draw from each of the previous speakers and move more towards what we can contemplate as a possible solution given the crisis today. It goes without saying that that the Trump administration's actions, which have finally woken us all up to the state of the world, it is not that this state did not exist, or that the earlier American administrations were not party to similar activity. The continuum has been present for the last several decades. It is just that the present action is so vile, for want of another appropriate word, that it has shocked the world into realizing the state that we have descended into. And at the same time, I would not point a finger at the Donald Trump administration alone. I think the rest of the world is equally responsible for allowing this state of affairs to happen to us. Very interestingly, the speaker from Russia, Dmitri, also expressed doubt about whether there was an inside angle to this. And that suggests an inside angle not just to Venezuela, but of acceptance of what has happened worldwide. That Mr. Trump did not follow through with more invasive attacks and allowed the vice president to assume the charge of interim vice president. That he cautioned her, many would say threatened her, as we saw in that in the Atlantic interview which he gave, and he mentioned that much worse would await her if she didn't abide. So obviously there is, and she categorically acknowledged that she would continue to work with the United States, to some extent suggesting that she would endorse the present petrodollar arrangement. I won't say the agreement, because Venezuela wasn't part of it. And the agreement in any case expired last year. But the speaker from Mexico, I believe, mentioned that the whole situation is one where the dollar is, or the United States is collapse, is at the end of the tether, and therefore has been forced to into acting the way it did, which is correct. And all of us have been party to this, not for a year or two, but we have tolerated this for 50 years. When after the Second World War, all of us entered an agreement whereby the standard drawing rights were created, and that is how we agreed to value our currencies. Effectively, we accepted the American voluntary commitment to link the dollar to the gold and thereby provide a gold-related valuation of the SDR. But when America departed from this on 15th of August 1971, that was a unilateral decision. We accepted it, possibly because many of the more dominant trade partners of the United States were locked in a situation where they had no option. But that was not really true of all the world. That was the first betrayal. And from that day on, we have had many, many betrayals till we now have descended into this last stage of violence, threatening the onset of a world war, which one of my favorite authors, Isaac Asimov, had a character who said, violence is the last resort of the incompetent, sometimes also the scoundrel, but I think that is the word we must eschew at this point of time. But this act of violence has brought to us many aspects that America is bankrupt. Do we need to save a bankrupt empire? America, for the last 75 years, has been consuming much more than it has been producing. And the weighted monetary system that it has enforced, and post-71, fiat money has been, the value in the system has been enforced by the power of the gun. It is classic Maoist doctrine. Power flows from the barrel of the gun. That is what America has enforced, and we have accepted. And very recently, in fact, a day or two after Venezuela happened, I heard Professor Mersheimer, and I'm putting that particular quote in the chat, where he said, states exist in an anarchic international system. Very true for the situation we are in today, where there is no higher authority to protect them. And that is why we are faced with this terrible problem of how do we get out of the problem that we are in. The strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must. So Venezuela is definitely suffering what it must. America has done what it can, but is America really strong? That is a question we must all ask ourselves. Because as Mersheimer says, but weakness is not a permanent condition. And the distribution of power is constantly shifting. The corollary, if weakness is not a permanent condition, strength is also not a permanent condition. American might has eroded not merely because of the ballast of its armaments. America is old. It fired a lot of tomahawks. 1.8 Mach. The rest of the world is no longer limited to 1.8 Mach. The American economy cannot afford to phase out all its tomahawks and bring in new missiles. You have a bankrupt empire bluffing and pretending, using corruption and bribery to intimidate leaderships worldwide, individuals in leadership, not institutions entirely, not nations entirely. The American dome is not in a position to defend itself against newer, faster missiles from elsewhere in the world. So what does it do? It bullies small nations. Russia could not allow Ukraine because it could not allow NATO missiles in Ukraine on its border. The recent conflagration between India and Pakistan, and where Pakistan is now nakedly in front of the world as an American stooge. It always has been, but now the relationship has come forth with Field Marshal Asim Munir being a regular guest at the White House. And we found out by some fortunate stroke of fortune that the nuclear radiation which was generated by a hit on the Nur Khan base was not from Pakistani nuclear weapons, but from ancient American silos which the Pakistanis were not aware of. Whether that was whom it was targeted for in that region is a question we all need to ask. 3 years ago, we saw a 28-day exercise between the United States and Nepal. I have not heard of 28-day military exercises elsewhere, nor have I heard of such exercises anywhere else being extended to 45 days. And this doesn't happen unless there is a construction element involved. And as every NATO member and every American alliance partner who are checking their own premises today should be aware, even NATO membership nowadays requires that the country first sign an agreement. What do they call it? There's a special agreement between between American the states. The exact agreement is not coming to me just now, but it's called there's a state relationship between America and the state, wherein the American National Guard reaches an agreement with the defense service of the country seeking NATO membership. Now, the National Guard is also the service which, these state National Guards, not federal ones. They are the ones who look after the entire Minutemen and other programs. They are the ones who service their missile systems. And when those bodies come in, not American Marines for military exercises, but when the force looking after establishing military silos, nuclear missile silos, comes visiting into smaller countries, spends 45 days constructing silos, then there's something very alarming. When that happened in Nepal 3 years ago.
Mr. Merriman, excuse me. You please summarize. Please summarize.
Very well.
We have to move on.
But you see, that has happened in Nepal 3 years ago. That has happened on 3 sites in Bangladesh last year. Now that is what we have to contend with before we can call America's bluff. The issue which everybody, if there is a solution, the solution lies in calling President Donald Trump's bluff. Whether we need to support civil society in India, in the United States, and whether we need to remind the United States, the civilian population of the United States, that they have a moral commitment which they lost which was very strong till their actions in the Second World War. But somewhere American academia needs to reevaluate the contribution of the pragmatists, which is today foremost in their philosophy, and whether that has been the seed which has led us to this stage, whereby pragmatism has evolved into opportunism. And that is a question for the entire American nation, and we must be supportive while they evaluate this. Having stated this, now the question comes, how do you find, I know I have been a little blunt, not a little, maybe more than a little blunt, but if you do not identify the problem, then there is no way you are going to ever reach a solution. A similar situation happened when my country, India, was under colonial rule of the British. And it is always a question of who benefits. And when Mahatma Gandhi gave the call for Swadeshi, for surviving on our own produce, then he received an invitation from the mills, from the mill owners and the mill workers of Lancashire, who were facing unemployment and mills shutting down because their exports to India were no longer possible. And he accepted their invitation. They thought they would explain to him in the humanitarian case of the unemployment which was spreading all over Britain. And he went and he explained and he asked them to understand, as unemployed workers talked of their poverty, he showed them a picture of the poverty of India, whose produce was taken at a very nominal price, such that farmers were forced to commit suicide, and then sold back to them at a very phenomenal margin, which the elite would afford, but not everybody. And we all know that Gandhi gave up his three-piece suits, which he used to wear as a barrister in England, to endorse the loincloth, to portray the state of the common man in India, and to identify with it. And eventually it was the workers of the unemployed, the rendered unemployed workers of Lancashire, who provided the moral basis for the labor movement inside the United Kingdom to commit to Indian independence. The Tories remained very opposed to the idea. Mr. Churchill was very critical of that, but eventually it was the moral consciousness of the British people which made it possible to reverse this at whatever cost. The British Empire gradually unraveled, but morality prevailed. For morality to prevail, America must similarly be forced to introspect. That, I think, is the only possible way that this problem can be solved. Otherwise, we will keep moving from the last crisis to the next bigger crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let me just say, we very much appreciate not only what you're saying, but I would like to make sure we have a discussion in the Q&A section on Gandhi and what you were beginning to get at. We just have, we want to make sure we stay within the domain of what we've proposed. And we now have, for our next speaker, Mr. Dennis Small from the Ibero-America desk of EIR.
Thank you very much. So, where is the system's Achilles heel? We've certainly described and discussed many of the problems, but that issue defines scientifically the way to a solution. I would propose that there are actually two Achilles heels. Perhaps the most fundamental is the very concept of man underlying this current imperial system and the savagery we're seeing. But I leave that to further discussion and elaboration in the discussion period around what Helga discussed earlier with her 10 principles. The other Achilles heel of the system, and note that I did not say United States, of the system, of the global financial system, is the financial system which is about to blow apart into smithereens. And I'm going to make use of some graphics which I have prepared for today with some new numbers, as a matter of fact. It turns out that the Bank for International Settlements has just published new numbers going through the middle of 2025. Total global world financial aggregates now total approximately $2.4 quadrillion. Quadrillion, that's a 2 followed by 15 zeros. Back in 2008, when we had the financial blowout, it was only 1.6 quadrillion. We've seen a 53% increase in this cancerous speculative bubble over this period of time. All of the policies that were implemented to address this crisis have only made it worse. The vast expansion of quantitative easing, the crypto bubble, which is now moving forward very nicely, thank you very much. More quantitative easing coming with what's planned after Jerome Powell. And what we have going on in Europe and in the United States is a shift into what is known as Schachtian economics. Schachtian economics is named for Hjalmar Schacht, the central banker of Adolf Hitler. Schacht was imposed by London bankers on Germany to implement these policies, and it's straightforward. Massive military buildup for the purpose of wars of conquest and submission and imposition of depopulation and genocide to maintain the financial bubble. Now, people are aware of, we've heard discussion of Donald Trump's proposal, the latest one, not the earlier one. His earlier proposal, he told us he was going to cut the U.S. military budget in half. Well, he got that wrong. He actually now plans to increase it from 1 trillion to 1.5 trillion. So here's an indication. These numbers are not precise, but they're pretty close. In 2025, the entire U.S. government budget was about $7 trillion. Of that, 1 trillion, 14%, went to interest payments on the government debt. Another 1 trillion is the military budget. Trump now proposes that for 2026, the budget for the military will rise to 1.5 trillion. So what we're looking at is that over a third of the entire budget of the United States will go to either the military or interest payments. Now, why do I include these together? Because the military budget, the military-industrial complex, is actually not a military-industrial complex. It is a military-industrial financial complex. Every major military contractor is run by the banks of Wall Street and the City of London. Lockheed Martin, #1 stockholder, State Street and BlackRock. You've heard of BlackRock. Raytheon, Vanguard Group and Capital Group. Northrop Grumman, State Street, Capital Group. Vanguard Group, State Group. Longview, Vanguard Group. BlackRock, Vanguard Group. And these financial holding companies or institutions control vast sums of money. In the case of BlackRock, it's over $9 trillion. And in the case of Vanguard Group, it's another 7.6. Just the ones indicated here, it's close to $23 trillion. So the military-industrial finance complex is part of the apparatus for Schachtian reorganization of the global economy for the purpose of doing exactly what Adolf Hitler did, to maintain a financial bubble, in that case coming off the Versailles Treaty, today this $2.4 quadrillion bubble. Now, it is this, I would argue, that is what is ultimately behind the looting wars. It is behind the genocide we've seen in Gaza. And it will be behind, if we allow it to happen, the exact same policies that we saw with Auschwitz implemented today. And we are beginning to see the first signs of this. And I think that you are going to see this precisely in the actual intentions of what is behind the Venezuela operation. I'll come back to the real intentions in a moment, because it is certainly not drugs, and it is only secondarily oil. The ultimate purpose of this thing is to, as has been mentioned by others, including President Ramotar, expel from South America and the Caribbean any alternative to this bankrupt Western financial system, which is to say China and the Belt and Road Initiative. But what we are seeing now around Venezuela is the intended financial warfare, not just against Venezuela. We're seeing it also against Iran, bankrupting their currencies, driving the conditions for social revolt to go along with the intended military actions against them. The Venezuela was, until about a year or two ago, the main supplier of oil to Cuba. No longer. Mexico is now the main supplier of Cuba to oil. Cuba needs about 1 million barrels per day of oil. It is not getting that. And Mexico has just been told in no uncertain terms by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the man whose presidential ambitions stand in inverse square proportion to his stature, both moral and physical, that Mexico had better follow along with this genocidal blockade of Cuba and any other nation that chooses to rebel, or they will get the same treatment. They'll get the Venezuela treatment. So now what's our flank in all of this? Why is this a flank? Because you cannot take the military issue on directly. There are two countries that can provide some leeway around the military question, and they are Russia and China, because they can provide a certain amount of dissuasive force. We've seen that in the case of Russia with the Oreshnik. China has enormous capabilities as well. But in both of these cases, the threat to the global financial empire of nuclear retaliation if they escalate, in other words, the doctrine of mutual and assured destruction, only functions if there is a modicum of sanity in the West. That modicum of sanity is rapidly disappearing. Merely generating more mutual and assured destruction is not going to work. The way to stop the financial problem is not to go after the military problem. The way to stop the military problem is to go after the financial problem. That is the Achilles heel. Now, how can this be done? Well, Lyndon LaRouche was very clear on exactly how to go about this. He proposed that the entire global financial system of the West should be put through an orderly bankruptcy reorganization. And I emphasize orderly because we have to make sure that we walk that very narrow path between the necessary changes and global thermonuclear war. In the United States, there's a form of bankruptcy reorganization, which is called Chapter 11. That's when you have a company whose underlying capabilities of production are still intact, but has a gigantic debt which doesn't allow it to function. So rather than liquidating the company, which is, of course, what Auschwitz is all about, liquidating populations and nations, what you do is you put that financial structure through orderly bankruptcy reorganization. Now, that can certainly be done, and it will happen willy-nilly because that 2.4 quadrillion bubble cannot be paid. I don't care if Donald Trump thinks he's Ozymandias himself. It cannot be paid, no matter what is done. So the question is, how is it going to be reorganized? Now, the crucial point in all of this that Mr. LaRouche always emphasized is you have to generate new credit for productive activity, for infrastructure development in particular, employ the population productively, and increase the technological level of the population more generally. The new credit which is issued for these projects has to be protected from the old speculative bubble, and that is done in the case of Western economies by the Glass-Steagall type of approach, bank separation. In the case of the developing sector or non-dollar-based countries, you do it with exchange controls. You simply don't allow the cancer to enter into your monetary and financial system. But the crucial question that we have is we have to increase the productive employment of the world's population. And that occurs through the, if I can move my own slide, there it is. This is a study we did back in 2019. We took the global labor force, 3.5 billion people, And by looking at the portion of that labor force that was officially unemployed, but also de facto unemployed, meaning in informal activities that don't produce anything, children who sell chewing gum on the streets, or people who are involved in activities just to barely survive, which they need to do, but it's not productive. And we determined that the entire real unemployment level was 46%, 1.5 billion people and more who need to be productively reemployed. Consider the enormous generation of wealth, real wealth, that will occur as that kind of activity occurs with infrastructure projects such as this, which we are proposing for the Caribbean Basin. Venezuela would be an important part of this. It would link up with deep water ports in Ponce, Puerto Rico, in Mariel, Cuba, eastern coast of the United States, high-speed rail development running through all of Central America into Mexico, up to the United States, through Canada, Alaska, across a Bering Strait tunnel, all of these creating the conditions of substantial economic real growth. Now, this is a broader picture of the world land bridge, which the Schiller Institute has been elaborating over really decades with projects in every corner of the planet. But the idea is, since the world we have one humanity, a single humanity, we have a single common interest in the development of the productive powers of labor in every nation. And what I've drawn on the map here is Shanghai port, which China and Peru helped to develop, which exists, which vastly increases transportation productivity across the Pacific to Shanghai, and the possibility, which is under discussion now, of building a rail system across South America from Shanghai to Ilhéus in Brazil. And this really is what the Venezuela operation is all about. And it's stated very clearly by the Southern Command. We will not allow China to have a foothold in the Americas because they don't want this to challenge Wall Street and the City of London. Now, this is what South America looks like to everyone in South America and the Caribbean. Just a handful of the great projects which China has either already built or is proposed to build. And these are just a few of them. So this is the option being presented to people who look at the world from the developing sector, from the South. And if you compare what China has proposed to what the United States has proposed and built in the last 2 decades, you'll see the comparison. This is China. This is the United States. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So we have a situation where we have a global system which is extraordinarily vulnerable, extraordinarily dangerous, but there is a pathway to transforming this if we see its actual vulnerabilities and mobilize among all nations and across the planet around a common concept of man, which is based on our unique creativity to develop the economies of every single nation in the world. And that is why I say, and conclude with this point, that the concept of man is the fundamental vulnerability, the Achilles heel of the enemy that we have before us, and it is our greatest strength if we can recognize it and wield it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dennis. That was Dennis Small, Executive Intelligence Review, Ibero-America editor. We're about to go into a question and answer period. We do have one a comment which will be made by Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Bosshard. I do want to indicate, I want to thank, for example, everybody, first of all, that has been with us throughout for the entire forum, and particularly the panel. There are some questions, for example, for Ambassador Chaz Freeman and others. We will be getting to those in discussion, and we will also, of course, ask that the panelists may have various things to say. So before we do that, I'd like to go to Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Bosshard from Switzerland, former military advisor to the Secretary General of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe.
Thanks a lot, and good evening from Switzerland. I'm happy to understand that the US action against President Maduro's government in Venezuela has been sending a message to the world, which obviously has been understood. But let's not put all the blame on Trump. The Trump administration didn't even bother to consult the United Nations or Regional Security Organization but instead, after an information campaign of limited credibility, struck unilaterally. This is, however, not an isolated incident by the Trump administration, but rather reflects a problematic tradition that US administrations began after the end of the Cold War, when they believed that with the collapse of the Soviet Union and as the undisputedly strongest military power in the world, all conflicts could be sorted out, if necessary, by military force as well. The culmination of this policy of disregarding the United Nations was the illegal air war against Yugoslavia in 1999. We all remember that. At the time, we were surprised that the US, of all countries, was dismantling the favorite project of its former president and leader from the Second World War. But we now see that the Trump administration is continuing this destructive work. Power and strength are the foundations of world politics today, sources close to Donald Trump have stated. The reactions of the Western Europeans were particularly worrying, who otherwise so readily portray themselves as guardians of international law. From the perspective of international law, it is not crucial whether a head of state came to power in a somewhat more or less democratic manner, as long as he or she reasonably adheres to the rules of interstate relations. In this sense, it is irrelevant whether Germany or other Western European states recognized the Maduro government or not. I would remind you that according to the democracy indices of US think tanks, only about 30 countries in the world are considered to be fully democratic. They do not have the right to attack all others at will, especially since Americans and Europeans have often demonstrated in the past that they can coexist quite well with undemocratic governments, provided business is good. The United States remains the strongest military power in the world, and together with the Western Europeans and their allies in the Indo-Pacific region, they are also superior to coalitions of other states, and as it has just been said, they're determined to keep their number one position in the future. The approximately 150 countries in the world that do not belong to a Western military alliance now have both military and diplomatic options. On the one hand, they can form coalitions and build up their military capabilities to a level that allows them to pursue a counter strategy, or they can push for the imposition of international legal constraints on the Americans and Western Europeans. I think most of them will do both simultaneously. While with the unilateral actions of the United States against Venezuela, we are once again falling short in the realm of international law, having deviated from the Briand-Kellogg Pact, which was concluded on the basis of the experiences of the First World War. Europe and probably the United States, they cannot afford another century like the 20th century with 2 world wars. So let's call a spade a spade. Let's stop talking about the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine was a doctrine adopted to prevent Portugal and Spain to restore their empires in the Americas. Today's actions of the Trump administration are not aimed at that. They are an attempt to make Latin American countries colonies against and to keep China out of the game. In contrary to the Cold War, nuclear weapons, at least the technology to build such, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and new artificial intelligence are available to a number of states, not only to the superpowers or the P5 as it used to be. the idea of a nuclear war between the USSR and the United States was frightening enough, but I don't even want to think about a nuclear catch as catch can between different states with nuclear weapons. The multilateral world, or the multipolar world, to put it that way, requires a balance not only of military power, but of soft power as well. And we should start to invest in soft power as well, to invest in a build-up of diplomatic capabilities, not only of the BRICS countries, but of the global South in general. And we should, and that's the key, we should address the Western Europeans and make them clear that in this situation, support, unconditional support for the Trump administration doesn't make them more popular in the global South, and we should prevent them from applauding and discouraging them from proceeding alike otherwise. Otherwise, the second mightiest military power on the world will contribute to a worldwide catch as catch can as well. So let's address the Europeans. That's the first step in a strategy to get out of trouble now. Thanks a lot for your attention.
And thank you very much, Colonel Bosshard, for what you had to say. We're going to now transition to discussion. Just want to make something clear to people that are watching. We're going to be going directly to the panel and getting various remarks and observations from the panel. We know that we're getting some questions that are coming in written to the degree that we're able to do that, we'll answer or address some of these matters. But what we want to make clear, and I think it should be pretty clear from people who've been listening, there's plenty that the panel itself has to say. And I'm going to ask, first of all, if Helga would like to say something about her view of what has been said so far, or anything else that she'd like to add.
Yes, I want to thank all the speakers, first of all, for all your extremely valuable contributions, which I think are interesting insofar that they really represent a far spectrum from different corners of the world, while not all of them, but I think it does represent the gist of what is going on in terms of public discussions in most countries. Now, it is impossible to pick up on every single detail which was mentioned. So I want to pick up on what Congresswoman Huerta said, because, when we organized for the event, I had asked everybody to think also in terms of what to do. And since you, Congresswoman Huerta, did make some very important proposals, namely to, first of all, digest what was discussed in this meeting and make a resolution of January 12th, form a task group, and then, basically start actually a mobilization, reaching out to governments of the world to act on the basis of our suggestions. And I think I want to reiterate, that it's not so. I mean, the situation is pretty grave and extremely dangerous. I don't want to diminish that one iota. But on the other side, we also have a counter movement by the BRICS, by the SCO organization, which represent the global majority. And, I would really think that if we go out of this meeting with the clear mobilization to approach governments of the global majority, and then naturally also the global West, but eventually everybody, but also, that we please pick up on what I said about the Global Governance Initiative of China and the statements by Pope Leo XIV on the method of Nicolaus of Cusa, because I think we have to catalyze our thinking in a completely different way. If we only state facts, I don't think we will arrive at a new level of thinking. And that's why I think what the Pope said in terms of the method of the coincidence of opposite should somehow inform the way we go about things. So I wanted to maybe ask, all the participants to relate to the proposal of Congresswoman Huerta.
Let me just first of all ask if anybody has anything to say about that at the moment. If not, perhaps people would think about that and then raise your hands. Ambassador Freeman, I'd just like to ask you if you would like to give your thoughts. I know you have constraints often on time. And I also have a question that I'd like to pose to you. So please go ahead if you'd like to make some remarks first.
Very briefly, I'm very impressed with Mr. von Sponeck's 4 proposed actions. I think it is a mistake to risk placing the current emergency in the context of the bilateral struggle between the United States and China. I believe this is an issue for the global majority to take up. I think the UN General Assembly has the power, in effect, to impeach the current American administration for violations of international law and comity. And I believe that would, in part, accomplish what Mr. Verma advocated, namely stimulating some introspection on the part of the American public, which otherwise is like some other great powers, confident in its impunity. I think it would be a shock for people in the United States to realize how far we have departed from the norms that we sponsored after World War II and from the opinion of the world. So I would urge those 4 actions to be seriously considered by this group, and I particularly endorse the latter suggestion of the formation of a structured international civil society organization that could serve as a global conscience. I think this is beyond the capacity of any single non-governmental organization to do, and there is merit in considering that proposal. And I would argue, as I did in my prepared remarks, that what is required now is structural change in the global system. It is not enough to argue about specific violations of order. We have to consider how to restore order, and that requires repairing the existing institutions or finding alternatives to them. So those are my remarks, and I think they're consistent with Helga's advice.
Very much so. And I see there's a hand up. So Mr. von Sponeck, would you like to respond? Go ahead.
You were muted.
I think.
Yeah. No, you're still muted. Can't hear you.
We can't hear you. Can't hear you. Still muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
I just wanted to say, Ambassador Freeman, thank you very much for what you said. I want to get out of this meeting a feeling that we begin to move away from the temptation to get more and more knowledge about an issue while neglecting the question of how we can address the issue. And I would say there is the reality of the world we are facing today suggests that on the one hand, we have a multilateral structure that is defunct. The political UN is defunct. On the other hand, we also have a civil society structure that is defunct. The World Social Forum used to be a hope. Today, we have no World Social Forum. We have no organized global civil society that should partner or could partner with the United Nations if there is a United Nations that is worth to be attached with. And I would like to submit to you that as a group, we could follow up and be involved in making sure that the UN Pact for the Future, this valuable idea of a reformed United Nations, 50 years later than it should have been, that discussion, but that's another matter. But that we should really try to get our act together in ensuring that the political powers in the UN system don't get away with pussyfooting, with slowing down any attempt to create the UN that has been identified in the UN Pact for the Future. And let me add one more thing, the idea that we have to create an organized civil society is, I think, more urgent than anything else, because I believe that the political powers will be much slower in creating win-win situations as compared to the civil society that has made demands over many years to make a difference, but they are poorly organized. So we should, on two fronts, I think there is a tremendous challenge now to do something. Let us depart from the temptation of getting more to know about Venezuela, getting more to know about Gaza. We don't need to know more. We know the illegality of what has happened. But what we do need to know is how to go about in preventing a further deterioration of a system that we still have. Thank you.
Very, very good. Ms. Pandor, please, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I so very strongly agree with the previous speaker that we need to look at the matter of civil society and social movements and the role they can play. I also think organizations of the South, such as BRICS, for example, should be supported and encouraged to do much more to challenge rather than to merely respond. I think the United Nations has been weakened over time, its structures and mechanisms, and I don't think it has the global support necessary for it on its own to be a strong actor. But if there was sufficient mobilization of civil society, I think we could restore the United Nations to the role it should play in steering global affairs. So I really believe we should not neglect the opportunity now of encouraging social movements to be far more active and responsive. Thank you very much.
Yes, Ambassador Freeman.
Yes, Dennis, you referred to the fact that I have limited time, and unfortunately that is correct. I want to endorse what Mrs. Pandor just said, but I want to make a more fundamental point. It's easy to denounce and condemn. And we've heard a lot of that today. I think that is not enough. I think we have to decide what we're going to do about an imperfect world that has become even less perfect than it once was. And I don't believe that the United Nations, frankly, political United Nations, as Mr. von Sponeck described it, has any real legitimacy anywhere these days. It is more a mechanism for covering up the offenses of the powerful and endorsing might makes right than implementing the principles on which it was founded. So I think there needs to be some courage on the part of the global majority in using existing mechanisms like the General Assembly, as Mr. von Sponeck suggested, to force the introspection on the American people that we require. Help us save ourselves from ourselves, if you will.
Ambassador Freeman, I want to thank you for being with us today. I do want to try to prevail on you because you and Ambassador Jack Matlock in particular represent the collective diplomatic memory such as it still exists in the United States. Is there something that you think could be done in the United States to activate the citizenry of the United States to play more of a role than it is playing at this point?
I think the operative question, both internationally and domestically in the United States, is the level of alarm about our departure from our ideals, from our aspirations, sufficiently great to bring about change? I think in the condition in my country, frankly, if I were a foreign diplomat stationed in Washington reporting on the domestic condition of the United States, I would describe it as entering a pre-revolutionary phase because the level of delegitimization of the government and its actions, both domestically and abroad, is so great that much of the citizenry is increasingly not just alienated, but enraged. There is a wonderful book which I will commend to everyone called Exit, Voice, and Loyalty by a professor who fled Germany in the 1930s and made a career at Harvard. And that book describes how one gets into a pre-revolutionary situation. The authorities do not deliver what they must. Some people drop out, that's exit. They just give up. Some people give voice. They protest, they object. If they are suppressed, then the numbers giving voice decline, and you are left with those who are apathetic and who accept reality regardless of what it is. But if you get below a certain percentage of apathy, the system breaks down. This, I think, is exactly what is happening both domestically in the United States and internationally. And the question is then, can civil society globally, domestically, in each of the countries represented here and the others not represented, be galvanized to force governments to confront the realities they are currently in denial about and change their evil ways? And I'm afraid with that, I've got to leave because I'm already late for another engagement. I thank you all for your...
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. Okay. And that is Exit, Voice, and Loyalty for People, I believe, by Albert Orr Hirschman. Is that right? Hirschman? Thank you. Thank you, sir. All right. Others may... Helga, did you want to say something, by the way, at this point?
Well, I would ask all the participants of this panel if, you may be willing to participate in the follow-up of this seminar, because I think so many valuable proposals were made, and I think it would require to put them into a comprehensive package and a suggested plan of action, so that maybe 2 or 3 of this panel could volunteer to digest what was discussed by all participants, and that we, constitute such a organizing group to not lose any time. That would be my question to all of you, hopefully before you all depart.
Okay. All right. Does anyone else have any other comment or question? Please, Congresswoman Huerta.
Bueno, lo que yo quisiera plantear es que en este
what I would like to present in this set of proposals about the declaration of January 12th of the...
Could we get the interpretation, please, into English?
We are getting it, actually. I was hearing it.
Okay, my mistake.
Sobre esta segunda,
about
la primera, la propuesta era la
about the
declaración del 12N y
proposal
después la
of
creación de un
the
grupo de acción
January
inmediata
12th
en
and
varios
the
equipos.
creation of
Proponía el
a
equipo
group of
financiero, técnico
immediate
y
action.
diplomático. Ahora, por lo dicho, quisiera agregar
Because
un
everything
equipo de
have
trabajo
been
más al
said,
que
I would
además me
like to
puedo
add
yo
another
juntar
team,
y
a
formar
task,
parte de
a
eso, que
task
sería
force, and I
una
would be
especie de
part
equipo
of
de
that. It
organización
would be
de algo
a
que
type
podríamos
of
llamar la
organization
ciudadanía
group
global. Por ejemplo,
to
ese tipo de
inform the
organización que pudiera ser
citizenship.
una
For
especie de
example, the type of
directorio
organization that
de
could
los
be
ya
like a
existentes
group
movimientos
of the
sociales alrededor de todo el
existing
mundo,
social
en cada estado
movements
nación,
around the
que
world
están
in every nation
reaccionando ya de
that are
manera
reacting
severa
in
hacia
firmly
las
towards
acciones
the
imperialistas. Y creo
actions, the
que si
imperialist
lográramos
actions. If
conjuntar
we could
los
get together
liderazgos,
the
¿no?
leadership,
Helga pues tiene un
and
liderazgo
Helga has
mundial
a
muy importante
leadership,
que puede ser tomado
a
en cuenta.
world
No
leadership
sé
that
si a
is
mí me
very
harían caso,
important.
pero lo
Uh,
intento.
and I don't know if it's my case, but I try to do it. But I
Estados,
think
naciones,
among
etcétera,
all,
ir conjuntando a las
and we who
organizaciones
are from different
existentes, hablar
nations,
con los
if we
líderes y
can
la
talk
gente que
to
ya está organizada,
organizations and leaders of other
organizaciones
groups that are already
en temas de
existing
trabajo y de las
about
cuestiones rurales y bueno, depende
work,
de cada
about
estado, ¿no? Como ya
rural
dices, pero hay
topics,
muchas
and
organizaciones.
it
Hay
depends on
alguien
every country,
que se
but there
haya
are many
dedicado a tratar
organizations,
de
something that is already
conglomerar o de conjuntar
trying
esos
to get
esfuerzos
together
globales.
efforts,
No lo sé, pero
international
creo que todavía
efforts.
no, y me
I
parece
don't know
que
who they are,
sería un
but I
camino
think
de la parte de
it would
la
be a good way
organización, de lo que podríamos
of
llamar un equipo
on the
técnico de
to
organización
organize
ciudadana
something that we can
global o
call
algo así,
a group
interconectarnos,
of
ponernos en conexión con lo que ya Helga
citizens,
decía que sería
and
una
we can get
propuesta
together with a
concreta de trabajo,
proposal
¿no?
that
Tendríamos
Helga
ya que poner
already
los
made a
puntos y las cosas
proposal,
en las que vamos a
and we
estar,
can have
que se van a estar
topics
planteando
that we are going to
por
be
la vía del Instituto
discussing
Schiller para
and
que nosotros
presented
al
through
ir
the
ya
Schiller
con esos grupos
Institute.
o
So
liderazgos ya
us,
vayamos con
with
con
these leaders of other groups,
conjunto de acciones
with
concretas,
a group
Denise,
of
que son las
concrete
que podríamos
actions,
estar incentivando o
or Dennis,
proponiendo que se hagan
we can
y que estos
promote
grupos y que
things to
estas
be done. So these groups,
ya organizadas personas puedan
these are
estar
already existing
también poniendo sus
organizations can
agendas de
be
lucha global, digamos, ¿no?
also
Algo
presenting their own points they are fighting for, or something in that of that sort.
es cuanto.
Okay. Let me, Helga, do you want to respond to that or just continue?
You.
Okay, very good. I have a question I'd like to pose particularly for Her Excellency Naledi Pandor, as well as to Donald Ramotar, President Ramotar, and others. I'll put it that way. That's the following. Obviously, there are people all over the world that often interact, whether it's on the International Peace Coalition or otherwise. In the United States, of course, this weekend will be Martin Luther King weekend. And the notion that you are up against, if you're up against a force far more powerful, you have people who feel powerless. You have a circumstance right now. And we've already addressed a few things on this issue of civil society. But are there any reflections, Ms. Pandor, in particular, that you would have? Because I know you've talked about on previous occasions the need for the adults in the room to stand up. And sometimes those adults don't necessarily have power, but they have ideas. And I just wondered if you might address that matter. I think that also converges on matters concerning Gandhi and other matters as well.
I think that one of the things we should acknowledge is that the impact of Gandhi and Mandela was felt largely through their ability to mobilize masses. We have to present a vision that is an alternative to communities worldwide, and we've got to encourage those engaged in organizations and mass action to really lift out a focus on the good. I think there's too much of a focus on the negative and insufficient courage to lift out the good. And we have to really, as Mandela said, and of course, Senator John Lewis, we've got to find people who are prepared to make good trouble. And there are people out there, but we've got to communicate the notion that there is a vision, there are ideas, and there are actions that every individual can take. The idea that we should limit civil response to organizations, I think, renders people immobile. We should encourage every individual to take a stand on these issues. The reality of us as members of the world community having allowed the genocide in Gaza exposes the degree to which we have really not had the courage to take up the good and to make good trouble. So I would say, arising from our discussion, that there are a number of issues related to a world that is different, which have been lifted out by all the speakers in this panel. We need to take those ideas, make them more public, and really have organizations focus on these as part of the work that they do as organs of civil society. I sincerely believe that authoritarian regimes, dictatorship, evil of domination can only be addressed through mass mobilization and civil organized formations. If you don't have organization, you act at the level of the general. So we need to really draw the world together and have a push that compels governments to understand that the people who seek the good are serious about looking for it and will act to ensure that governments are responsive.
Thank you. President Ramotar?
Yeah, I would just agree completely with Foreign Minister Pandor. I would just like to suggest that one of the things that we could do is to make an appeal, a general appeal, to governments of the world, to the people of the world, to what is taking place. I think maybe someone could draft a good appeal to make to the world. That's one of the things I think we should do. Secondly, we should express solidarity, first and foremost, with the people of Venezuela, the working people of Venezuela, and assure them that we're standing with them. And moreover, for Cuba, I think Cuba is in grave danger at this point in time. Venezuela was an impediment to move aside to get at Cuba. And I think Cuba needs now, this country that has given so much to the world is in grave danger, and we must make our voices heard. I like the suggestion that probably it could be within the appeal to demand a General Assembly meeting to talk about what is happening, because I think that a lot of small countries, I could speak about what's happening in the Caribbean, are really, really afraid to open their mouths to say anything to anger or to get any kind of displeasure from the government of the United States. And maybe there would be strength in numbers if we can get a General Assembly meeting to try to condemn what has taken place and to deal with many of the issues at hand. But I don't need not repeat what Comrade Pandor has said.
Sure. Mr. Verma, do you have, please? And I apologize. I think you had your hand up before and I did not see it. Please, go ahead.
No issue. You see, I feel that there is this, if we are to look for a solution, then there are three essential elements to that solution. I think Dennis pointed out that it is impossible to expect that this debt is ever going to be paid, that this bubble will be paid. And that is what, so that brings forth another realization, that if there is an element of debt forgiveness which the world has to look into, somewhere the whole world has to be prepared to accept that that will be the starting point for a solution. But then comes the other issue that it has to be balanced against the requirements of fairness, because there will be a lot of other nations and their people who will lose out because they have bought into American treasuries. So we have forgiveness, we have fairness, and we have the third very necessary subject which comes up when handling a bully, that if you forgive a bully, he expects to continue behaving in that manner. And that is where a certain amount of sternness in the administered justice becomes necessary. And that is why I was pointing out the other dimensions of America. And people only be able to handle America if they realize that this flashpoint of violence has not happened because he expects to get away with it. It is an expression of fear, of a system breaking down. And it is all, the many fears are not just the financial ones we all understand. There is also the other fear that the massive stockpiles may soon be rendered irrelevant, and thereby the power which has been supporting the financial scam of the last 50 years will evaporate. They need to get their act together before that happens, and they need to get, this is for the bully element. Hopefully we will be able to get the non-bully element inside the United States to take over. And the bully element spans both the parties today. And let us not think, this is not a dictatorship that we are up against. This is a democratic leadership with widespread support for their actions, widespread support for robbing other nations for their own consumption. And it is that realization which we must take to the American voters. Without that, we will never get a solution. The bully will continue to aspire to the bully ideals. We need the American voter to question his congressman so that they can't cross over to the wrong side. After all, President Trump did argue for taking on the deep state all through his campaign. Now he seems to be, his administration is being run by the deep state itself. So MAGA voters have to understand how they get taken for a ride by the deep state's takeover of the new administration. And then Congress has to rein in the CIA, which reins in possible international collective any force outside the United States to address this issue. For instance, it's so strange that this has happened, but the media, I have not heard a single voice talking about the fact that the admiral who was the admiral of the Southern Command resigned his job precisely because of this kind of orders. And he said this is genocide, but nobody's talking about him. So the global conscience is also, justice is not something which the weak and the silent can ever achieve. And you cannot rein in a bully without making him realize that you know that his bullying ability is now a thing of the past, in every sense of the word. International leverage, bully quotient vis-a-vis other nations, blackmail quotients vis-a-vis other nations, and even military power vis-a-vis other nations. These are issues which they have to understand, that if you spend, you is a bad word to use here, that if one entity can spend $1 billion for a particular space project, But if there are other nations in the world who can achieve the same thing with $50 million, then the balance of power is shifting. Of course, there is the threat that those who achieve it in $50 million, then their key scientists are immediately lured across for individual payoffs. That is what we are experiencing. But the world has to wake up to these issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think perhaps one of the things we might do committee-wise, you and Dr. Pandor particularly, and also President Ramotar, be interesting to have a dialogue with Americans, particularly those who have been in some of the veterans from the old civil rights movement. There are not many people left, but there are the constituencies. And it might be interesting to take up this question because nonviolent direct action in various parts of the world might be something of great interest. We're pretty much up on time, everyone. And so what we're going to do, we're going to go to Dennis Small. And then I think I'm going to ask Helga to give a kind of concluding remarks for us to move ahead here. So, Dennis, you have something?
Yes. I want to thank Mr. Verma for...
I'm sorry, Dr. Pandor. We'll come to you after Dennis, okay? Go ahead.
All right.
Thank you to Mr. Verma for referring to the non-bully elements in the United States. There are some. I certainly like to speak on behalf of them. I am an American. This is crucial. This is the 250th anniversary of the independence of the United States. This is a moment where, through our organizing and activity, the LaRouche movement in the United States and the presidential campaign that we are involved with, that capability of responding inside the country of the non-bully faction is absolutely crucial. Here's what I mean. There has been discussion raised on the importance of the BRICS, absolutely crucial, the SCO and so on, as well as organizing among civil society. The key to waking up my fellow Americans is to make them understand that the cause and the issue of the development and the security of the global majority is in the national interest of the United States. The voice of the South, as represented in significant measure here, heard inside not just the United States, but also Europe, is absolutely critical to putting together this idea of coincidence of opposites. Most Americans think that migrants are their enemy. Most Americans think that they believe what's in the media. The economy is doing great. It's not. The United States economy is collapsing. Manufacturing employment is dropping. What do you think is going to happen when over a third of the budget goes to Wall Street through the military and interest payments? If we can get across, and I think this group here is the germ seed of that, to the population in the North, including emphatically the United States, on this 250th anniversary, the concept that there is a single interest of all mankind, of the one humanity, and to understand the coincidence of opposites, apparent opposites from that standpoint, then we have the basis for actually solving this global problem. I think that many of the proposals that were made are absolutely excellent, and we should use this group and move forward.
Thank you, Dennis. Dr. Pandor.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention one thing, that there's a global movement called World Beyond War. And it has a chapter in many, many countries, including in Venezuela. This organization has called for a global day of action for January 17th in support of Venezuela. They do have a link that could be accessed to see the kind of work that they do, but they are able to marshal a civil society to respond on such matters. And I think making a 17th of January a success would be very important in signaling the views of the world on this incursion into Venezuela. And I think we should confirm that all of us have drawn lessons from the United States of America, including in our own support for our struggle against apartheid. And thus, America is a country and its people that we've held in high regard. But having said that, we cannot neglect to act in support of the good that I referred to earlier. So this is really to mobilize intentions that would make the 10 points that Dr. Zepp has referred to so cogently, as well as our colleague from Mexico, a reality. To create that world, we need to restore geopolitical stability and a global community that can act together for the good of all. So I think let's try and join this global group against war and see whether it is possible to send a strong message to the world that as a world community, we're aware and we are concerned jointly.
Thank you very much. Okay, Helga, please.
I think this meeting was extremely productive. And I think if we very quickly, work through all the different proposals and then, reach out to all the groups and institutions in the world who are already moving in this direction. And I want to repeat, there are very good institutions and very good individuals. And I want to say, on the issue of debt forgiveness, it's no coincidence that, and I don't want to say that I'm saying this in a religious way, I'm saying it in a human way. The fact that Pope Leo XIV made that speech about the coincidence of opposite at the occasion of giving his speech to the Jubilee. The Jubilee is an institution of the church. I think only the Catholic Church, I'm not entirely sure, but that's more than 1 billion people, which they have every 25 years, basically advocating that every 25 years, illegitimate debt must be forgiven. And, that is a spirit which is very conducive because, as Dennis Small was elaborating, this present financial system, which is transatlantically based, but reaches with its tentacles in practically all countries of the world, that system needs to be replaced, hopefully in an orderly fashion, which probably will mean if the governments of the world would agree to go for a global Glass-Steagall banking separation, it could be done in an orderly fashion, because I think one of the biggest threats of the whole thing is that if you have an uncontrolled collapse of the combination of the AI bubble, the stablecoin bubble, and the bubble of the derivative bubble, this could plunge the world into a chaotic chain reaction, which would bring things completely out of control. So I think this question of bringing the world financial system in order is one of the most important topics people should really pay attention to. And it must be done in an orderly fashion, because otherwise chaos will result. Like 2008, we were on the brink of the abyss, and only because the central banks pumped money endlessly, so that today the outstanding bubble is 40% bigger than it was in 2008. So that means that we should bring forth the power, the moral power of the Pope, having called for a jubilee and having called for this method of the Cusanus, Nicolaus of Cus, coincidence of opposites. Likewise, I think we have other elements, the BRICS was mentioned. So we should make a concerted efforts to pose what we discussed today to the BRICS as an organization, and to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, to the UN General Assembly, and naturally to the US voters. And just yesterday, or 2 days ago, our presidential candidate of the LaRouche movement, Diane Sayre, announced her campaign for president inside the United States, which was endorsed by a whole number of very important individuals. So that will be taken up there. And therefore, if we collect all the obvious next steps and then act on it, I think this meeting can turn into a real game changer for world history, and we should be extremely encouraged by this initial session. So let's just do it.
Thank you, Helga. I want to thank Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Bosshard, Dennis Small, Namit Verma, María de Los Angeles Huerta, Hans Christoph von Sponeck, His Excellency Donald Ramotar, Dmitri Trenin, Ambassador Chance Freeman, Professor Zhang Weiwei, the Honorable Naledi Pandor, and of course Helga Zepp-LaRouche for today's meeting. And although we did call today's meeting It's Worse Than You Think, it's clear that after the discussion we've had, it may be better than a lot of people know. And it's our job to make sure that they know why it's better and how we can actually lead a path out of hell into at least purgatory, as some of us say, over the next immediate period. So on behalf of the Executive Intelligence Review, we want to thank everyone for joining us today for today's emergency forum. And now let's get to work.